Hello, Guyana students. I wanted to review the physical geography of Guyana a little bit today with particular focus on the Guyana Shield. We'll start off with a map of Guyana's geographic situation, a term used in geography to describe the location of a place in reference to other places. And so, of course, we start off with the map of South America, which you're all familiar with at this point, the general location of Guyana. And then you can see zoomed in most of the country of Guyana, including Georgetown and the international airport. This is actually an Opwall map. And the focus of our Opwall expedition, we will start off in the Iwokrama Forest, which is, as we'll learn a little bit later in the lecture, is a place of remarkable biodiversity and some very unique geographic and geologic qualities and characteristics. We'll also visit the Surama village, which is outside of the reserve, which is where we will meet the indigenous village community up the Burabura River. And so with that context, let's talk a little bit more about the topography of Guyana. The topography is the general lay of the land, and it is usually described in terms of mountains and valleys, of areas of relief. The term relief actually means differences in elevation, and so obviously mountain areas are going to be areas that produce relief generally. You can have high elevation areas that have low relief. The Tibetan Plateau is an example, and indeed they do have some similar areas that are generally flat plateaus and other mesas and things like that that are reasonably high elevation in Guyana. And so as we look at the map of Guyana on the right side here, we can see that much of the country is very low elevation and fairly flat. These are the green areas on this shaded relief map. And then as we grade into the southern areas of the country, we can see by the light yellow that these are higher elevation areas. And then as we move into these browns, these are going to be the highest elevations. And by our standards, these are not especially high mountains. We're going to see mountains that are upwards of 6,000 to 7,000 feet. But the topography and the elevation actually has a profound influence on the ecology of Guyana and the Guyana Shield, as we shall find out. The primary mountain range is the Pacarema Mountains, and we'll learn a little bit more about Mount Roraima, which is the highest elevation. You can see at 2,810 meters. So again, you would just multiply by 3.28 if you want to get your elevation in feet. Again, we've talked a lot about the fact that there's a concentration of population in this coastal region. You can see how the towns and cities, as indicated by these red dots, are all concentrated in this area. As you get further south, you're going to see far fewer settlements and is much more sparsely populated. This map of the geologic provinces from the U.S. Geological Survey is something that is sort of puts Guyana in context. And what this map is illustrating is these broad areas of the Earth's surface, the Earth's crust. The description below uses the term cratons, which are old and stable parts of the continental lithosphere. The continental lithosphere is the continents. Of course, you recognize continents. The lithosphere is both the crust, which is the outer shell of Earth's surface, and also the upper part of the mantle that is the next layer below this outer shell of the crust. Not something that, if you haven't had geology, that you need to be too concerned about. But it is important that you recognize this term shield. You've probably already heard the term Guayana shield. So what exactly is a shield? Well, it says that cratons, which are old and stable parts of the continental lithosphere, can be described as shields. And shields then are base rock outcroppings that crop out at the surface. These can also be platforms, which are basements that are overlaid, or basement rocks that are overlaid with sediments and sedimentary rocks. Okay, so the way to translate this map then is these orange areas are the oldest parts of the Earth's land surface, and they serve as the foundation upon which the modern continents were constructed. So if we look at North America, for example, this is known as the Canadian Shield. This is Hudson Bay. And then you can see adjacent to the shield, where you have the actual outcroppings of these ancient rocks, you have sedimentary rocks, where sediments have been moved off of these bedrock areas and then deposited. And then you'll also see basins that are formed, and then what are described as origins here are actually mountain ranges, and mountain ranges that have gone through relatively recent uplift. And so these light blue areas are going to be the most mountainous areas of the continents, of course extending along the western United States with the Sierra Nevada, the Cascades, extending northward into the Coast Ranges and the Alaska Range. Of course, South America dominated by the Andes, which are produced through a subduction zone, which you learned about last time. So these are volcanic mountains produced as this ocean crust plunges beneath the continental crust. We will not be experiencing that directly, but rather focusing on this particular area, which is known as the Guayana Shield. Before I leave this map, I wanted to also highlight for you the ocean crust, because this ocean crust is showing us different ages, with the lighter colors being younger. And what we can see is that this area that separates the African and South American continents in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, that it is young and then gradates outwards to older ocean floor. So what we know to be happening now is that these two continents are actually separating from one another, and they're separating at a predictable rate of about 2.5 centimeters per year. And that if we turn the clock back about 250 million years ago, these two continents would have actually been connected. And this process of seafloor spreading has opened up and continues to open up the divide between the continents. That also tells us that this area of ancient shield rock was once connected to Africa, as was this area known as the Brazilian highlands, connected to the more southerly parts of the continent. So here we have a more focused view of the Guayana Shield. You can see that it has a different spelling than the country of Guyana. You can also see that it has an extensive highland area that extends well into the country of Venezuela, and also extends across through parts of Brazil, Suriname, and French Guiana. The fact that the United Nations has declared this as being a regional and global significance, and that it is home to a variety of ecosystems and keystone species of biodiversity, really illustrates just how important this area is to global biological diversity. I suppose it's worth noting on this map that the Guayana Shield, of course, extends over a large area, and then you get this highland area of exposed bedrock, and this shield area actually is the source for rivers that will flow both northwards and will flow southward. And if we look at the south flowing rivers, most of those will eventually merge into the Amazon River, which is the greatest freshwater river system on Earth. And if you look at those that flow north, you'll see they include the Orinoco River, which is a top 5 river in the world in terms of flow of water. So very important source of natural fresh water. So here is Mount Roraima. One of the unique characteristics of this, as part of this ancient shield, is that this ancient bedrock has uplifted and eroded away over time, resulting in a flat-topped mountain, as opposed to the sort of summit peak you might see in Mount Shasta. Mount Roraima, again, a different view of it. We can see the water flowing off of it. And as you look at these rocks, remember, these are some of the oldest rocks on Earth. And so Earth is believed to be, by best estimate, about 4.6 billion years old, billion with a B. And so the rocks in this area are as much as 2 billion years old. So some of the oldest rocks on the planet. And just for context, if you were to go to Mount Shasta, for example, you would be looking at a mountain that is roughly 750,000 years old, and you could easily find rocks that were a few hundred years old. So really a baby by comparison to global geologic processes and geologic landforms. The hydrography of the Guayana Shield, the term hydrography refers to the process of flowing water or surface water. And here again, we're looking at the Guayana Shield as a whole. You can see that there are 47 medium or large rivers that drain through the Guayana Shield region. We will be focused in this yellow area. And you can see that, for example, the Essequibo River, the Potara River, that is home to Kaieteur Falls, those are found in this region. A little more focused view of the rivers of Guyana. There is the Kaieteur Falls that we'll visit. Okay, here is the Essequibo River, the Rapanuni River. We will travel up into this area, and we will also be along the Bora Bora River, which is actually not shown on this map. I'm excited that we will be visiting this dramatic landform, and quite a kind of a cool view here. If you look beyond the falls, you can imagine all of this water that's draining off of this highland area that we've just illustrated in the preceding slides. Of course, as you get down into the lower elevations, these rivers will widen out. Last week, there was some discussion about this sort of saturated lowland area that actually creates some significant challenges for Guyana in terms of human settlement and agriculture, but from a biological standpoint, it's hugely important. Okay, stepping back just a little bit, I wanted to draw your attention to these maps that illustrate broadly climate and vegetation in South America. And I wanted to start with the climate information. So let's look first of all at annual rainfall. And so what we're going to see here is that we're going to be down in this region. And so we have some areas that include some of the highest rainfalls, indeed some of the highest rainfalls on Earth occur in this area. And then you can see that it starts to dry out a little bit as you move inward towards Venezuela. And so when we look again at the map in this area, we're going to see that while we have true tropical rainforest, we also are going to see some of this dry scrub showing up, some mountain conditions. These dry scrub areas are going to be more characteristic of areas that have lower rainfall, and these will be described as savanna. Okay, so we're going to focus on the tropical rainforest area, but there is a lot of adjacent areas that are described as savannas. Just to, again, sort of highlight the point with respect to biodiversity, this is the Wikipedia excerpt related to the Iwokrama area that we'll be going to, and they describe it as having this region having some of the highest biodiversity in the world, with many endemic species, which I'm sure you will talk about in the natural history class. These are species that are isolated or unique to one particular place. The region houses over 3,000 vertebrate species, and they go through and describe fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds. Plant life being equally rich with almost 14,000, a little over 13,000 vascular plants, approximately 40% of which are considered endemic. That means that 40% of that 13,000, so let's just say 5,000 vascular plants that are entirely unique to this region. Remember that most of our pharmaceuticals come from these areas, so these could include plants that have cures for cancer, AIDS, you name it, many of which have not even been inventoried yet. And so it just really illustrates how important the conservation of this area is, again, described as being similar in nature to the Amazon. A couple of highlights, many of which we just discussed with respect to biodiversity. You will learn a little bit about carbon sequestration in your reading this week. Keep in mind that the isolation of species produces new species, and so I've cut off the slide here, but Kaieteur Falls, because it's a waterfall area, actually isolates fish populations, and as a result, this is where Kaieteur is located. So as a result, fish have evolved differently above the falls than those below the falls. Numerous cases of this process of speciation taking place. Okay, so again, just to kind of highlight some of the ecological areas that we're looking at here, and you see two contrasting forests. We're going to be focused more in the humid montane lowland laterite forests. These are your tropical rainforests, as opposed to these scrub savannas. Okay, eastern alluvial forests, we'll probably see some of those as well, probably less of the hills seasonal forests because we won't be so much in that region of the country. So again, just to give you a general idea of some of the different types of forest systems that we'll be seeing within Guyana. Okay, so this is Iwokrama, and this is showing the Essequibo River, the location in the inset map, and some of the focused area, some of the things that we'll be looking at and visiting. Here's Sarama, the village, the Amerindian village that we'll be visiting, and the tremendous diversity of species that we will encounter. Always hard to tell what you're going to encounter. Of course, this is an iconic animal, and one that is very reclusive. The likelihood of having any kind of encounter with this cat is highly unlikely. Bats, caiman, which are relatives of the crocodile, of course. Okay, well, that's the end of my introduction to the region. I've come in under 20 minutes, and I look forward to seeing you guys online, and even more so to seeing you guys at the bus next week, headed down to the airport.